This watch restoration almost made me abandon watchmaking as a hobby. But I'm still here, and if you want to skip directly to the restoration, there's an indexed chapter below that you can click on. But if you've got a few minutes, I'll tell you a story. First, a little backstory. I've been doing watch restoration as a hobby for about 3 years. I'm self-taught mostly from watching YouTube videos and reading books. I really liked watches as a kid, and I had a few good ones in my teens and 20s. But I never really followed the watch market or knew much about clock and watch history other than the names of some of the big watches like Omega, Rolex, Seiko, and of course Casio, Timex, Swatch, and so on. So my watchmaking practice has been focused on whatever timepieces I've had on hand, either my old ones or ones that were passed on to me, or by finding affordable watches at flea markets. The first good watch I worked on was my father's 1952 Bulova Commodore. The watch in today's video is also a family heirloom, a gold-filled Longines tank-shaped watch from 1955, with Longines' in-house 9LT rectangular movement. I don't know whose it was or even which side of the family it was on. When my mom died, I got a mix of my dad's stuff and my mom's, and there was no post-it note on this one listing its provenance. So to me, instead of channeling the memory of a specific relative, it just makes me happy knowing that I'm connected to its history as a family descendant. So what happened to make me want to abandon watch repair as a hobby? Let's just say this project didn't go as smoothly as my other projects were going, and it made me doubt my skills, while others doing watch repair on YouTube made it look so easy. It started out fine, but I hit so many obstacles that I got mad and sad way too frequently. So why tell you the whole story? I could have edited out the drama. So why tell you the whole story? If you're watching this, then you know how much fun collecting watches and doing watch repair can be. But it can also be frustrating. The microscopic nature of how watches are engineered can test your vision, and God forbid you drop or launch a component and it may be gone for good. For every part in the watch, there's an exponential number of ways that you can inadvertently damage it. I did that multiple times. I told myself that if you're working on your own watch and you screw up, it's okay, and to think of it as a learning experience. I quickly got bored with my own advice. The restoration you're about to see was started in April 2022. I tried many times to complete this project, but had one setback after another. I walked away from it many times, and in those breaks I worked on other projects that let me practice similar problems. In the past several years, I've also acquired new and better tools, which is an exciting part of this watchmaking journey. You'll be able to see the addition of those tools throughout this video. But like many things in life, overconfidence can backfire on you. When the watch was almost complete, I attempted to make it run better, but ended up bending or breaking things that shouldn't be bent and definitely shouldn't be broken. Almost 3 years has passed since I started working on this watch. I am so glad it's finally done and I can put away all the parts bins it's been living in all this time. Who knows, maybe you have a project watch that's bested you a few times. If you finished it without giving up the hobby, I salute you. If you're still regarding its disassembled pieces with contempt, then maybe its time has come. Either way, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. I'm feeling pretty good about how this Longines came out, and recording this message to you is my final step of closure. This watch has a cool vibe, and whoever my relative is that used to wear it, I'm sure they'd be happy knowing the watch lives on and that it's still in the family. With that, let's begin the journey. Want to see something funny? It opened and then it closed on my finger. I'm trying to jumpstart the watch by blowing on the balance wheel. The balance will oscillate, but the escape wheel isn't turning. Since the watch won't wind, I'm assuming the mainspring is already wound to its extreme. So we will start disassembly by removing the hands so we can then remove the dial and access both sides of the movement. We align the hands and protect the dial with a piece of plastic before prying them off. This is the first time I'm working on a watch with a small sub-seconds hand. Man, that thing's tiny. The dial is held in place by 2 screws, which press against posts on the back of the dial called dial feet. The little bit of wear on the edge of the dial will be covered when we recase the watch. The dial washer is already off, and I'm going to remove the hour wheel, which, as you may have guessed, the hour hand attaches to. Let's flip over the watch and put it in a movement holder so we can take a closer look under the microscope. I want to assess how clean the movement is, looking for dirt, dried oil, signs of wear, and possible damage. Is the plating coming off the crown wheel? And what's this corrosion on the crown tube? As I mentioned earlier, the balance wheel will bounce back and forth when you blow on it, but the escape wheel below isn't turning. You can see dried oil on the jewels, but it looks like the teeth on most of the wheels are intact, but when we zoom in on the crown wheel, we can see what looks like rust there and on the pivot of the center wheel. I'm removing the balance assembly to get it out of the way so I don't damage the delicate hairspring and to give me better access to other components in the watch. I'm trying to see why the train of wheels isn't advancing. Let me let the power out of the watch by moving that click out of the way. That click is a ratchet that keeps the watch from unwinding. Interesting. Now it's letting me wind. So maybe there wasn't a wind on there before and maybe just something was jamming. Come on, jump. With a wind in the watch, the pallet fork should snap back and forth decisively when you nudge it. It's not, so we're going to let the power out of the mainspring so we can continue disassembling the watch. Man, first screw out. And there goes that. I'm still struggling not to launch spring-loaded parts. Son of a gun. But I'm also struggling with this inexpensive tweezer set that I bought early on in my watchmaking. Oh, new screwdrivers. These feel nice. I did treat myself to a complete set of new, high-quality Bergeon screwdrivers. One of my first watchmaking tool purchases was an inexpensive set of screwdrivers, which weren't bad, but I felt like the metal was too soft and their shape got deformed easily. The Bergeon screwdrivers seemed to be a harder metal, and their shape out of the box was better sized and sharpened to work with watch screws. With the train wheel bridge out of the way, we can remove the fourth wheel and the escape wheel, assessing the condition as each part is removed. Next, we'll remove the pallet bridge and the pallet fork. The pallet fork, sometimes called the anchor, rocks back and forth one tick and tock at a time to release the power from the train of wheels, and to transfer that energy to the balance wheel by flicking it back and forth. We'll slide out the third wheel and remove this diminutive pinion that directly turns the small second hand. This big gear is called the ratchet wheel, and it connects directly to the mainspring barrel. When the watch crown is in winding position and you turn it, it turns the crown wheel, which in turn drives the ratchet wheel. The ratchet wheel is attached via that square cutout to the arbor of the mainspring barrel, which when turned, winds the mainspring. Next, I'll remove the crown and winding stem, which is held in place by this setting lever screw. If you've ever had a watch where the winding stem came out, simply retightening the setting lever screw may solve the problem. There's a loose-fitting collar on the stem which has significant corrosion, which we will clean up later. With the setting lever screw unscrewed, we can remove it and flip the watch over and start disassembling the keyless works, which wind and set the watch. It's called keyless because pocket watches used to use a key to set and wind. Hence, watches that have a push-pull crown are denoted as keyless. I'm removing the setting lever spring, which has detents for the in and out positions of the crown. It also serves as a plate to hold down other components. I'll next remove this intermediate setting wheel. When taking apart a watch, it's important to note the top side and bottom side of parts, especially those that look perfectly symmetrical. But it definitely looks like the flat side was up. I'm still struggling with these cheap tweezers as I try to remove the minute wheel. Let's see if we can keep a hold of that spring from jumping. This is the yoke spring. There we go. Okay, we're getting close. This is the setting lever, the winding pinion, the screw that holds the yoke in place. Here's the yoke, the sliding clutch. There's 3 screws attaching the crown wheel on the other side of the movement, one of which I can see through the main plate. I took that screw out but realized I'll have better access to the others once I remove the barrel bridge. The barrel bridge on this watch constrains the mainspring barrel and serves as the pivot for the center wheel. I can't lift out the center wheel, which means it's probably held in place by the cannon pinion on the other side of the watch. Oh, well, the barrel just came out. Can you see that spiral curl in there? That's nice. I know there's a special tool for this. And while there are dedicated cannon pinion removal tools, you can often get them off by giving a firm tug upward with your tweezers. And with the center wheel out of the way, I'm going to turn my attention to removing this winding stem tube, which is screwed onto the main plate. Back under the barrel bridge, I'll remove the screws holding the crown wheel in place. So we have all of our teeth. The ratchet and click that we removed earlier is sprung by the click spring, which is attached by a screw on the underside of this plate. I couldn't get the screw out and didn't want to break anything, so I'll clean the barrel bridge with the click spring in place. I don't think it will make a big difference. Let's open up the mainspring barrel. I'm mesmerized by the spiral pattern, called snelling, engraved on the barrel. When you pop off the barrel lid, make sure you control the spring or it could go flying. Holy, I heard that go in 2 different directions. One of them went far that way, and the other one is down there. Oh, well, I still have the lid. Ha ha! Look at that. Well, that's that. The barrel is there. So the arbor went this way. Ho, ho, ho. Let's see what we can do with this. Come here, what's going on here? There we go. Hey, at least I'm wearing finger cots. Oh my. After an hour on the floor with a flashlight, I found the arbor in the total opposite direction I thought it went, and I had all of the parts neatly organized in my storage bins for cleaning. I'm pre-cleaning all of the pivot holes on the main plate using a sharpened wooden stick called pegwood. I'll be cleaning all of the parts in my ultrasonic cleaner, but any dried oil you can remove beforehand will improve your results and extend the life of your cleansers. I'm going to run the balance through the ultrasonic, but I want to mount it to the main plate first to protect it. Are you still bouncing? The larger parts are now loaded directly into these stainless steel baskets. Each basket will get a 5-minute dip in the ultrasonic cleaner in cleanser, followed by 2 rinse cycles. Delicate parts and smaller parts are loaded into these brass and stainless steel baskets, then into a larger basket, and to my shop where it will run through all 3 jars of my ultrasonic cleaning setup. Once all the solutions come up to about 45 degrees Celsius, I'll start the first basket on a 5-minute ultrasonic cycle. When time is up, that basket goes to the first rinse, and the next basket gets introduced to the cleanser. I hung the case parts from wires so they can also go through the ultrasonic cleaning process. After the second rinse, the parts are transferred to clean glass Petri dishes and placed under a warm air dryer. Back at my watchmaking station, I put the clean parts back into sorting bins, remove the balance, and inspect the parts to make sure everything came clean satisfactorily. I want to replace the little collar where the winding stem goes through. I have a little piece of Rodico here holding up the main plate. It's not a proper watchmaking video unless we extol the virtues of Watchmaker's Rodico putty. In addition to screwdrivers, tweezers, and pegwood, I'd say Rodico is a great addition to any new watchmaker's kit. It's great for holding parts, cleaning specks of dust and dirt, and soaking up excess oil. These screws are small like poppy seeds, and I'm having difficulty seeing when they're seated in the screw hole to get them started. Oh, fart, where did it go? Did it just fall in my Rodico? I think I see it. There it is. I am at the limits of my unaided vision here. At this point in my watchmaking practice, I have a digital microscope, which is fantastic for inspection, but it doesn't have enough distance under the lens to maneuver your tools while you're looking at the magnified image. So for now, I'm using a loupe or a head-worn binocular magnifier to work on parts too small for me to see with my naked eye. Have I permanently embedded Rodico in this movement? There's a little bit on there. My finger cuts attract the Rodico, or the Rodico is attracted to my finger cuts, and it sticks. So I found that putting some Rodico on this stick makes a big difference. It's time to attach the crown wheel back onto the barrel bridge. Remember our initial inspection where we thought there was rust or a plating problem on the crown wheel? I guess it was just dried oil and grime, because this part cleaned up great. As I'm putting the watch back together, I have a tremendous respect for the quality of the machining and finishing in this watch. I pre-lubricated the sliding surfaces where the parts come together before reassembling, and everything is turning smoothly. I ordered a new mainspring partly because I didn't have a mainspring winder to get the old spring back into the barrel. I purchased the spring from Cousins UK. And the first thing we want to make sure is that it fits in the barrel. You can order a mainspring if you know the correct dimensions, or in this case, I ordered the mainspring to fit my specific movement, Longines Caliber 9 LT. Now, why does it seem like this is bigger than my barrel? Uh-oh. 10.14 millimeters. I suppose I need to demagnetize these calipers. 11.07. So we're looking at almost a millimeter. Too big. That's funny. If I wasn't so frustrated, I'd be laughing more. So what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? My initial thought was to try rewinding the old spring by hand. I had done this once before, but it wasn't an S-shaped spring, and despite many attempts, this one wasn't going in. I contacted Cousins and explained that the spring I purchased wouldn't fit. After a bit of back and forth, they said it was the correct spring and I should purchase a mainspring winder or bring the watch to a professional for repair. The next day I ordered an inexpensive set of mainspring winders from Amazon, but that didn't go so well. Nope. Here's a clip from a previous video that describes it better. I took my chances on a $60 set of Chinese-made winders. They were not usable for me. Okay, so here's the 8200 winder. I think that's an Omega. The direction of the wind was opposite what I needed, so I had to use the winding handle from the 2836. The movement-specific winders were a hodgepodge of barrel and arbor sizes and wind directions. The build quality and materials were also subpar, and I had a very hard time engaging the hook on the arbor in the hole of the spring. So, I bought this. It's a Bergeon 5-piece mainspring winder set with left hand and right hand arbors and handles. Let me put the arbor on the winder handle. If the hook is gripping, it's going to feed that mainspring into the barrel. There's the spring. Here's the moment of truth. You place the winder into the barrel, and with a little push, thank you, new spring winder. With the new mainspring in the barrel, I'll add some lubricant and insert the arbor, with its hook locked in the hole in the end of the spring. The lid drops into place, and I'll use this tool which applies even pressure to snap it on. Having completed the mainspring barrel, which in watchmaking terms is called a barrel complete, I can finally continue with the reassembly of the watch. Remember my comment earlier about watchmaking sometimes taking a long time to work through your challenges? By the time I filmed this, exactly 1 year had passed since the day I opened the mainspring barrel, sending the parts flying. I guess mainsprings aren't the only thing that flies when you're having fun. The project is back on track. The mainspring barrel and center wheel are put in place, applying some of my red medium weight oil as we go. Then the barrel bridge with the pre-assembled crown wheel can be reinstalled. It's best practice to check that your parts are seated correctly and moving freely before tightening down the bridges that hold them in place. But it seemed like something was binding despite the mainspring barrel and center wheel being properly aligned. I loosened the bridge and the parts turned more freely. I checked to see if the barrel cover was on securely and decided to go under the microscope for a closer look. Both ends of the barrel arbor look good. Despite finding a little dried oil that didn't come clean, the arbor hole in the main plate looked fine. But when I looked at the barrel bridge, I saw what appeared to be a metal burr in the barrel arbor hole. Could this be making the barrel turn with resistance? This tool is called a cutting broach, and it's designed to make holes larger. I did not own a smoothing broach at the time, which is much less aggressive, so I used the cutting broach very, very lightly to deburr the hole. With everything reassembled and some fresh oil, the parts turned more freely. Okay, the restoration is back on track, full steam ahead. Let's get the setting lever in place, which is held by the setting lever screw on the opposite side of the movement, requiring this highly acrobatic maneuver. The winding pinion goes in next, lubricating it with Mobius 9501 blue grease. Now the sliding clutch, which slides to switch the watch between setting and winding modes, goes in. The winding stem threads through these two parts. The yoke drops onto its post and is screwed down. It rides in the groove of the sliding clutch. The yoke spring applies pressure to the side of the yoke. The cannon pinion gets pressed into place. These posts get lubricated for the remaining setting wheels. Now the setting lever spring is installed with grease on the friction points. I've put it in place loosely so I have wiggle room to engage the spring arm with the post on the setting lever, and now I'll tighten it down. Switching between winding and setting positions lets me see where I need additional lubricant. This synthetic grease should keep the watch happy for years to come. Let's turn over the movement and attach the click, which allows the ratchet wheel to turn in only one direction when you wind the watch. I've screwed it into place, but I need to remove the barrel bridge again to engage the click with the click spring, which is underneath. I'll lubricate the contact point with some blue grease and replace the bridge, checking that the click spring is doing its job. The ratchet wheel needs to be aligned with the square end of the barrel arbor, and its teeth need to mesh with the crown wheel and the click. When properly aligned, it gets screwed down and we can test that everything is turning smoothly when the crown is in winding position. Now we can rebuild the train of wheels, which is responsible for transferring the mainspring power to the escape wheel. The escape wheel goes in first. Let's also put that tiny second-hand pinion back in place.
So small.
Here's the third wheel and the fourth wheel. As the wheels go back in place, I'm taking care that the pivots are sitting in their lower jewels and their teeth are properly aligned with the pinions on the wheels next to them. The train wheel bridge is carefully lowered into place. With patience and a little bit of luck, the pivots settle into their jewel holes. It seems that the better the watch, the easier it is to settle the bridges back into place. I may have said it before, but the quality of this movement is fantastic. Mobius 9415 is a lightweight lubricant specifically formulated for use on the exit stone of the pallet fork, where it will come in contact with the teeth of the escape wheel. The pallet fork gets settled into its jewel and gets held in place by the pallet bridge, which also has a jewel for the pivot on top of the second-hand pinion. When both pivots are safely in their jewels, we can tighten down the bridge and put a small wind in the mainspring to see if the power is reaching the pallet fork. If everything is working as it should, the pallet fork will click back and forth when nudged, advancing the escape wheel one tooth at a time. I'm putting a little more wind in the mainspring before remounting the balance wheel. We are moments away from seeing if this watch will run again. Success! Look at it go! As I screw down the balance cock, the watch seems to run even stronger.
Oh, it actually liked that. Excellent. Okay, I don't know if I should share this with you or not, but I have an extra screw, and I don't know where it goes.
I'll keep an eye out for an empty screw hole as I lubricate the pivots on both sides of the movement.
Maybe that extra screw is the dial screw. Let me see. But that could be it.
The pivots on both ends of the balance ride in jewels that have two parts, one with a hole and one that's flat, called the cap jewel. To clean them, you need to separate the two pieces. Clean off the old oil, place a small drop of fresh oil in the center of the cap jewel, and then reassemble and reinstall the jewels. As for the balance jewel on the other side of the watch, that will require me to disassemble the balance cock and regulator, which is something that at this point I've never done before, so I'll save that for later. I'll remount the balance and put the movement on my time grapher to see how it's running, knowing we still need to circle back and lubricate the other side of the balance. The time grapher uses a microphone to detect the beats of the watch and predict how fast or slow it's running. It also shows how strong it's ticking, designated by AMP or amplitude. BE or beat error measures how evenly the balance wheel is swinging back and forth. A rate of 0, high amplitude, and low beat error are what we're aiming for. By adjusting the regulator on the balance cock, we virtually shorten or lengthen the hairspring until the rate is as close to 0 as possible. The microphone stand pivots so you can check performance in a variety of positions. This is a good starting point for a watch that wasn't running when we started. So far, this is all within my knowledge and comfort zone, but I knew I had to circle back and clean and lubricate the cap jewel on the balance cock. I've serviced cap jewels on watches with shock settings, which let you easily access the jewel from the outside. This watch has no shock setting, so the jewels are accessed from the balance pivot side, which requires removing the hairspring and balance in order to access the screws holding the cap and hole jewel together. The hairspring and balance wheel are attached to the balance cock by the hairspring stud, which is held in place with a screw. The outer coil of the hairspring presses against a thin wire called the regulator pin, which is attached to an adjustable arm called the regulator. The regulator can rotate in both directions, effectively shortening or lengthening the hairspring, which lets you adjust or regulate the watch to run faster or slower. There is a boot-shaped hood that covers the end of the regulator pin. This guard is designed to rotate, allowing you to release or capture the hairspring against the regulator pin. Most regulator boots are slotted so you can open and close them with a screwdriver. This watch was different. It didn't have a screwdriver slot, so I tried grabbing it with tweezers, being careful not to damage the hairspring. Uh-oh, what was that snapping sound?
Hey, it's off.
I didn't recognize it at the time, but I had bent the regulator pin. I'm continuing the service, oblivious to my mistake, and you can spot the bent pin throughout the upcoming sequence. When I finally recognized that the pin was bent, I did try straightening it, but I don't think it was ever really the same. All of the parts are now cleaned in 1-dip solvent to remove the old oil, and a drop of fresh, lightweight oil is applied to the center of the cap jewel on the regulator. Ideally, you want a drop that's half to 2/3 the size of the cap jewel, and this dollop was too large. Spoiler alert, this isn't the last time I'll need to clean and oil this jewel. The regulator is then reattached to the balance cock from the underside with these 2 screws. Then the balance is remounted, taking care to place the hairspring stud in its mounting hole and making sure the first coil of the hairspring is engaged on the regulator pin.
Put a little wind back in the watch. Well, I did something wrong. Oh, you know what? My bad. I have 2 coils running through that regulator pin.
I corrected the coils and tried straightening the regulator pin at this point. To my eye, it actually looked like it's running pretty well. Back on the time grapher, the rate and amplitude looked good, but the beat error was much higher, and you want it as close to 0 as you can. Off camera, I removed the balance and adjusted the hairspring collet to reduce the beat error. But I guess the stress on the regulator pin was just too much.
We need to replace the regulator, because guess what?
I broke the regulator.
Replacing the regulator meant removing the balance and hairspring again. This time I used my new balance tack, which has an adjustable platform that you can raise to relieve tension from the spring. Here's a look at the old regulator with the severed regulator pin. You can see a hole in the side of the regulator boot, which I guess is there to assist you in turning it, but no tool in my kit was small enough to be effective. So I attempted to make a wrench out of a cleaning swab stick with a hole shaped like the top of the regulator boot that I could use to turn it.
I'm just going to put a mark aligning where that little side cut is.
At this point, I'm practicing with the old regulator so I don't damage the new one.
Hey, look at that, it turned. So we've got ourselves a tool. So this is a Longines regulator, new old stock. Genuine Longines. I don't think I've ever opened a new old stock package. Look at that. I feel like I'm opening a time capsule.
Time to try our homemade tool to open the boot on the new regulator. But the regulator boot wouldn't budge, so I applied some lightweight oil to where the boot turns and let it soak overnight. I reassembled the balance with the new regulator, but I accidentally bent the hairspring. I tried to straighten it, but I made things worse. Much worse. I was so mad at myself that I put the project on the shelf for 4 months. During that hiatus from the Longines, I practiced my hairspring straightening skills on lesser watches. I finally returned to the project with a much clearer understanding of what needed to be done and the confidence to attempt it. I'm using my hand removing levers to lift the hairspring off the balance staff. Working on a small video light with a piece of translucent glass on top, I can see the flaws and more easily manipulate the spring back into shape with tweezers and a sharp probe.
There looks like there's a bend right there, right over here. There's a little ripple,
And the same thing here, there's a bend, and once again there's a bend right here. The collet that holds the hairspring in, this collar, it seems to be a little bit pushed up. It's not sitting flat. You can see that the hairspring is not in the same plane as the collet. I spent several hours patiently and gently easing the spring back into shape. When the spring was flat and the spiral was even, I placed it on the balance cock with the post in its hole and the first coil over the regulator guide pin. I then continued to adjust the spiral until the collet was centered over the jewel and the outer coil, or terminal curve of the hairspring, followed the arc of the regulator as it travels through its range of adjustment. I turned my attention to aligning the balance wheel so the impulse jewel sits between the pallet fork banking pins when the hairspring is in resting position. These 2 points on the pallet bridge act as banking pins to constrain the pallet fork. I'm removing the pallet fork and replacing the pallet bridge so I can better see the impulse jewel. Centering the balance impulse jewel between the banking points is how you reduce beat error, which was very high the last time the movement was on the time grapher. A quick check sighting down the line created by the escape wheel, pallet, and balance jewels, and it looks like the impulse jewel is in an ideal position. So I remounted the pallet fork and the balance, and the watch started right up. I can't believe it's actually running after bending and twisting the hairspring as much as I did. I optimistically put the cannon pinion back on the dial side of the watch and placed the movement on the time grapher.
I can't believe it's running as well as it is.
After everything I've been through over the past 2 years, I'm thrilled that I was able to overcome so many setbacks and get the watch running like it is. I'll take the win and can now turn my attention to refinishing the case and the crystal. The 10-karat gold-filled case is going to get a light polishing on my small buffer using a medium and fine compound and soft cotton buffs. When it's done, I'll remove any remaining compound in the ultrasonic cleaner. The dial is cleaned under the microscope, using Rodico to remove any larger debris, and a lens cleaning tool with a soft brush and microfiber pad on either end. I don't want to use any solvent on the dial for fear of removing the paint, which is in pretty good shape to begin with.
I think that's about as far as I'm comfortable going.
Since the hands aren't painted, I'm going to clean the surface with isopropyl alcohol and follow up with the microfiber side of my cleaning tool. When cleaning hands, you need to anchor the hand in place and wipe in the direction that the hands are pointing so you don't catch the tip and bend them. All of the hands shined up really well. I polished the corrosion off the stainless steel crown tube, holding it in a pin vise and going through progressively finer grits of sanding sticks.
Yeah, that came out great.
Time for the crystal. Let's take a look under the microscope and see if there's any hope of saving it.
It's an acrylic crystal, and it has a few gouges, scratches. That one almost looks like a hair, but it's also a scratch.
I think it can be restored by wet sanding it and then finishing up with Polywatch polish, which is great for getting scratches out of acrylic crystals.
And you can see the high and low spots starting to come up on the crystal. We want uniform cloudiness. 2,000, 3,000. It's Polywatch time. Rub until the liquid in the Polywatch evaporates, and then I'll buff. And then we start it again. And I want to get the edges, because on these types of crystals, those edges are a part of the optics. So there we go. After Polywatch, much smoother, much more clear. I mean, you can just see through that like a window. We'll get this washed up. We'll get it reinstalled in the watch.
The crystal is held into the top half of the case using this special glass adhesive, which dries perfectly clear when exposed to ultraviolet light. I've never glued in a crystal before, and the instructions suggest testing first to see how the glue flows. I'm also using this opportunity to see if it will cure under my new 365 nanometer ultraviolet flashlight, which I recently purchased to get better photos and videos of luminous hands and dials. Yay! Look at that. I put a mark at the 12 o'clock position just because the crystal fits into the case just a little bit better in this direction. I made sure the crystal and the case were dust-free and cleaned the edges where the parts would meet with isopropyl alcohol. I then applied a continuous bead of adhesive to the inside lip of the case. The crystal was put into place and settled with a little pressure. Okay, the crystal is seated and there's no squeeze out. If I needed to, I'd be able to wipe any excess glue clean right now. Then I shined the UV flashlight on the crystal from a few directions for about 5 minutes. The job came out great and I felt one step closer to getting the watch back together. I'm removing the crown to polish it and to see if we can fit a rubber gasket to help keep water out of the watch. Ooh, look at that gunk! Forgive me if this is a little gross, but I wonder if there's a DNA test that could tell me which relative this watch belonged to. Seriously though, it really makes me think that even though the crown and stem went through my 3-step ultrasonic cleaning process, there's nothing like an inspection under the microscope and some good old-fashioned manual cleaning. After a swab with isopropyl alcohol, I washed it again in my small ultrasonic cleaner using warm water and Dawn dish soap. I secured the winding stem in my pin vise and unscrewed the crown so I could polish the gold plating without worrying about bending the stem. I'm using a polishing paste called Simichrome on a clean piece of cotton t-shirt fabric. That's an amazing difference.
I have a reflection of the microscope.
I cleaned the crown again in my small ultrasonic to get any remaining polish off of it. Now I'll reattach the stem with a small amount of blue Loctite adhesive, which will secure the crown, but is removable if necessary somewhere down the line. A quick cleanup with watchmaker's paper to remove the excess, and we're ready to fit the gasket. After a dip in silicone paste, the rubber gasket is coaxed into the recess of the crown. While the crown and stem are in my small parallel vise, I'll put a dab of my blue watchmaking grease on all of the contact points in preparation for reinstalling it in the watch. Before the dial goes on, I'll add a little lubricant to the cannon pinion before sliding on the hour wheel and the dial washer. This is probably the last time this side of the movement will be seen for many years to come, so I'm making sure everything is clean.
Fiber. Got him. Okay, here we go.
The dial is carefully lowered back onto the movement and secured by tightening the dial foot screws. Last chance to clean the dial before the hands go on.
Here's that tube.
The loose-fitting crown sleeve is placed over the stem, which is then reinstalled in the movement and secured with the setting lever screw.
There we go. Okay, so we have our winding position. And we have our setting position. Excellent.
The movement is then snapped into the case back, and the hands can be pressed into place. After pressing down each hand, I'm checking that it's running parallel to the dial and not rubbing the markers or the other hands.
Good, we have clearance.
Finally, the top of the case and the crystal can be snapped back into place. After everything I've been through restoring this watch, it's a wonderful sound. Instead of the original gold bracelet, I'm opting for this black ostrich leather band. I really couldn't be happier with the results. Looking back, I wish I hadn't bumbled the regulator and hairspring like I did, but maybe this watch wouldn't have meant as much to me if I didn't have to overcome those struggles. Thank you for giving me your time today. I hope you enjoyed the project, and maybe it will give you some inspiration as you move forward with your watchmaking journey.
Now that is a proper dress watch.
I'm Mike, and as always, I look forward to our next time together. Hey, don't run away just yet. If you haven't already, please support the channel by giving this video a like, join the conversation by leaving a comment, check out my related videos, and click that subscribe button. It really helps, and I appreciate having you as a viewer.